The house by the swamp Maxime loved solo fishing trips. He enjoyed being far from civilization, surrounded by silence and wild nature. This time, he chose a new spot, a secluded swamp deep in the woods. Locals warned him, "Don't stay there overnight." The house by the swamp is a bad place, but Maxime just laughed. He didn't believe in superstitions. By evening, he reached his destination and set up his tent near an old, abandoned wooden house. The structure was rotting, its windows broken, yet it still held the eerie feeling of past life. Out of curiosity, Maxime decided to take a look inside. The wooden floor creaked under his steps, and dust filled the air. In one of the rooms, he noticed deep scratch marks covering the walls, like someone had desperately clawed at them. Night fell. The moon reflected off the dark water, and mosquitoes buzzed annoyingly. Maxime zipped up his tent and tried to sleep. Then he heard it, a slow, scraping sound against the fabric of his tent. He held his breath, straining to listen. Someone was outside. Carefully, he peeked out. Standing near the abandoned house was a tall, shadowy figure. It had no clear features, only two glowing red eyes piercing the darkness. The figure took a step toward him. Panic surged through Maxime as he bolted into the house, slamming the door behind him. He pressed his back against the wall, his heart pounding. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed through the empty rooms. It had followed him inside. The door to his room creaked open. Maxime never remembered what happened next. The next morning, locals found him standing knee-deep in the swamp, staring blankly ahead. Deep scratches covered his arms. When they asked what had happened, he whispered, "He's waiting for more guests." The man in the mirror. Oleg had just moved into a new apartment and started renovations. While clearing out an old storage room, he found an antique mirror covered in dust. The frame was wooden and beautifully carved, so he decided to keep it. As he wiped the glass, something strange happened. His reflection smiled at him, but he wasn't smiling. Oleg's breath caught in his throat. The grin on his reflection grew unnaturally wide, stretching too far across its face. In terror, he shoved the mirror aside and ran out of the room. When he returned, his reflection was normal. "Just my imagination," he muttered. To be safe, he turned the mirror around so it faced the wall. That night, he awoke to a sound. A faint scraping, like fingernails dragging across glass. He turned on the light. The room was empty, but the mirror was standing upright again, reflecting his bed. The next morning, Oleg decided to throw it out. He took it outside, leaving it by the dumpster. When he returned a few minutes later, his blood went cold. The mirror was back in his apartment, exactly where it had been before. "No more games," he growled, grabbing a hammer. With all his strength, he smashed the glass into pieces. Shards flew across the room, but in the broken reflections, he saw something terrifying. His reflection was still there, not shattered, not distorted. It was standing in the glass, staring at him with empty, soulless eyes and a wide, grotesque grin. Oleg screamed as the reflection took a step forward. That was the last time anyone saw him. When his friends came looking for him, the apartment was empty. The mirror was gone. But if you ever look into an old mirror and feel something smiling back at you, don't turn your back. The last photo. Katya loved vintage things. At a flea market, she found an old Zenit camera. The seller told her it had belonged to his grandfather, but he didn't want to keep it anymore. Katya bought it and later discovered there was an undeveloped film roll inside. Curious, she decided to develop the photos. The first few images showed dark, abandoned rooms, eerie hallways, broken mirrors, and decayed furniture. Then she reached the last photo, and her blood ran cold. It was a picture of her. She was asleep in her bed. She lived alone. Her hands trembled as she checked all the doors and windows. Everything was locked. Who could have taken that picture? That night, she couldn't sleep. The apartment felt unnaturally silent. Suddenly, a faint creak came from the hallway. Katya froze. Then a quiet click, like the sound of a camera shutter. Heart racing, she leaped out of bed and turned on the light. No one was there. Only her camera lay on the nightstand. But when she developed the new film the next morning, the last photo showed something horrifying. A hooded figure standing at the foot of her bed. Katya moved out that same day. Later, she learned that the camera's previous owner, the seller's grandfather, had vanished without a trace. The house in the old photos had burned down years ago, yet even after moving to a different city, sometimes in the dead of night, she still hears the faint click of a camera,